Hey guys, it's Clay on the trail. I am at the Fort Bridger Rendezvous in Fort Bridger, Wyoming. It's Labor Day weekend. It's been quite an event. The last video I made of the Fort Bridger Rendezvous, I was working for the Sheriff's Office as one of the mounted riders. You can check that video out. I'll link it in the comments. Since I've retired, you're going to get a little different perspective today. So I'm going to just walk around and kind of show what's going on here.
Is that where the Indians are this place?
one of these things. Pretty good. One or two, it's like in a number two. I'm painting right now. What about all this stuff in here?
She's right next to Wyoming. Guess what? Surprise!
It's easy if you want to just wear your breechcloth and pull your leggings off and go trap in the water. Again, dry yourself off, put the leggings back on, they're dry. If you think about it, because they were trapping in cold water, and a lot of times the weather was cold, so it wasn't just that the water itself, they had to be warm when they were in the water. They didn't want to be wearing wet clothes as they were walking around in cold weather when they got out. So any way that you can avoid having to wear wet clothes all day is a good thing to do. Let me talk about moccasins real quickly. Again, because different people came from different areas, this is actually a moccasin that would have been common on the eastern frontier in Kentucky and Tennessee. The reason I have these, my ancestors were some original settlers in Kentucky and Tennessee. So I kind of portray someone who grew up in Kentucky and then came out to the west. There was a guy in 1810 by the name of Edward Robinson. He was 61 years old at the time. He had lived on the Kentucky frontier his whole life. In fact, he wore a scarf just like this every day because when he was 12 years old, he was scalped by Shawnee Indians. So he wore a scarf like this to cover his scar. He came out when he was 61 years old, and so he could have very easily been wearing something like this. It's something that he had been making all his life for over 50 years. It's hard for me to think that he would have got here to the west and suddenly said, I'm never going to wear these again, I'm going to wear these instead. It wouldn't surprise me if he kept making the same thing he had been making for 50 years. But this pattern of moccasin, surprisingly, it's not a Western pattern. We don't know exactly what tribe it came from. We suspect Shawnee, Delaware, some type of Iroquois, but part of the reason that these were so prevalent amongst the mountain men, if you look at Alfred Jacob Miller's paintings, almost every one of his trappers wear these kinds of moccasins. The companies, the fur companies, would actually hire Indian women back in St. Louis and other places to make a one-size-fits-all moccasin. They would make the front half. If any of you came to the moccasin demonstration yesterday, they would make the front half and leave the back half open. And then they would sell them by the thousands to the fur companies. And the fur companies would bring those out to Rendezvous or later on to forts. So you could go into a fort like this and you could buy the front, the moccasin that was, the front of it was already done, and you just had to sew up the back in order to fit your foot. And so I believe that's the reason that you saw this so often amongst the trappers. But I can't help but think also that if you were living amongst the Crow for a winter or something like that, and you needed a new pair of moccasins, you could certainly pay a Crow woman to make your moccasins, and you may end up with Crow moccasins. Maybe you'd spend the next year with the Shoshone, you might end up with Shoshone moccasins. And then maybe throughout the year you'd stop at a fort and you might pick up some Delaware moccasins or something like that. So there was a smattering of what you would have seen. And the same thing applies for a lot of the other clothing besides the moccasins.
They had the pucker tool. They also had a common style as a side seam.
Yeah.
That was very common among the Indians. So if you've got Indian, they were making it for you. Most likely it was a side seam moccasin.
Does anybody here have a side seam?
I got side seams, but these are side seams. But I sold a second sole on them, so you can't really tell. There was no seam here originally, but because I sold the second sole on them, you can't really tell that. I sold the second sole on because the bottoms are falling apart. And then rather than losing my whole moccasin, I'll just take that sole off and sew a second set of soles on, so I can keep using the same moccasins for a longer period of time. And I'll just get holes in them and then tuck them. If I put that second sole on them, when that sole wears out, then I can take it off, re-sew another sole on it, and then keep using that same tack again. I think that was pretty common, I believe.
Yeah. It's a lot handier to just sew a sole than to make a complete pair. Something I already showed you the calico or Calcutta cloth. We think of ourselves nowadays as being, you know, really, what do I want to say? We're really modern and, you know, really with it because we have a worldwide economy system, and so we think we're pretty cool to do that, you know. Half of you, if you were to look at the tag on your shirt, it's from China or Sri Lanka or someplace like that. And we think that that's a modern thing, but the reality is that's a very old thing. The reason Marco Polo and Amerigo Vespuccio and all those guys who sailed around the world, it was all about trade. It was all about the economy. They were bringing stuff from China to England and stuff from England to China and stuff from India to Russia and everything you can imagine. It was just slower than it is nowadays. But it was still worldwide. So you would, at a rendezvous, you would see beads from Czechoslovakia and from Italy and from Russia and from the Netherlands, from, you know, what we call Dutch. These are a Dutch bead, and I won't get into too much of that. You'd see silk scarves, and the silk a lot of times came from the Orient. Again, this cloth came from India. They were getting tea from China. This is actually something that is clothing related. Again, England was well known for its wool. So the best wool in the world came from England. So the Indians wanted English wool. They didn't want wool from, I don't know, Rhode Island. They wanted wool from England. So they brought them wool from England. This is actually the reason I carry this. This is a blanket that would have been woven on the frontier. If you notice, it's got kind of a funny area right there in the check pattern, and the reason for that is because their looms were only 32 inches wide. Same thing with their clothing. So to make a blanket, they would have to make 2 lengths and then sew it down the middle, and that's why that looks funny there. So clothing might have seams that had nothing to do with the cut of, or the tailoring. It had everything to do with the how wide that material came on the loom and those kinds of things. But again, they were getting stuff from all over the world, and some of the clothing and fabrics and that kind of stuff worked really well, and others they found, you know, it wore out quickly. So after a few years of the rendezvous, they'd know what would sell and what wouldn't sell. When Lewis and Clark came, interestingly enough, back east, all the Indians wanted red beads. So they brought tons and tons and tons of red beads, okay? Well, when they got out here in the west, for some reason, the Indians out here, they wanted, where'd it go? They wanted blue beads. And Lewis and Clark hadn't brought very many blue beads, so they got they kind of ran out of blue beets pretty quickly. Obviously, that's not a practicality thing. That was just a taste thing. So they would bring trade goods out, and again, sometimes things worked, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes, you know, people just didn't like that stuff for no reason other than style. And some things they loved because of the style.
This lodge belongs to a friend of mine I trap with once in a while. It is made out of elk hides, brain tanned. Some hand forged traps out. Some beaver hides.
Mom, can I go Like, I haven't seen, I would spend money too.
Give you a different.
So if I'm tired, I trip over my own feet.
So it'll be pretty close to double play.
Yeah.
That's fun. So tilt back a high first.
Go all the way around at this point.
Where's the rest of your 20?
Well, guys, Rendezvous is gonna be done tomorrow. I'll be basically tearing everything down. I've been here for 3 days today. Tomorrow will be 4. I'll be tearing everything down and headed home tomorrow. So I hope you enjoyed. This was just a real quick glimpse at what takes place at a rendezvous if you've never been to one, or at Fort Bridger. If you've never been here between the, you know, the native dancers and the bagpipes and the shooting range, the tomahawk course, all the vendors, the people and the different teepees and tents that they live in. The demonstrations that the American mountain men put on, little living history or living archaeology as we call it. So I'm turning in, got a little fire going here. I'm in a buffalo robe and a wool blanket. I should be plenty warm. It's been getting pretty cold, but I'll be plenty warm for the night. I just hope you enjoyed a little glimpse into a different world. So please give me a thumbs up, share, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll catch you on the next one.